What's going on, guys? So I haven't figured out a shooting space, scene, whatever. I will probably just be arbitrarily shooting cell phone videos for a while. Just here and there as I have thoughts. Might be some at home, might be some here at the gym, might be some in other locations where it suits me. But again, as per the previous video, I'm not really doing this to get YouTube famous or anything like that. Thus why I'm not hooked up to a microphone or anything. You know, this could definitely use better audio quality, but it just is what it is. So something that's been on my mind recently is this concept of like identity and isms. I'm using ism, the suffix, as kind of a stand-in because obviously not everything is an ism, but close enough for government work, as it were. And the thing that I'm looking at is, I'm a very, very firm believer that, while you are human first, you are an individual second, and at a distant third, only then are you part of a group. And I think that is an important thing to state, because while we are social creatures and while being part of a group or part of several groups, as most of us are, can be useful and beneficial things, one of the things that we see, from a biology, physiology standpoint, time and time again, is that every time we try to shove people into groups, there are as many exceptions as there are the rule. And the fact is that we still end up having to take people as individuals. So while, chunking people together in groups for medical purposes or for training purposes or whatever may have some surface level value, by and large, you still end up having to tailor to the individual in and of themselves anyway. And then you may end up discovering a new kind of grouping of people that have a unique characteristic, trait, belief, whatever, on the back end of finding enough people like that. Because the fact is that groups are not some kind of like natural thing that we just are born into, short of the actual family unit and location, culture that you're born into, and those are even artificial, to a large degree, culture more so than family. But the fact is that groups come in on the back end. They always do, because the individual differences that make us unique as individuals tend to always outweigh any kind of groupings that we put together. Robert Sapolsky loves to talk about this study that they did where they did this thing where you flash a bunch of faces on a screen and you read people's reaction to those faces, and based on their reactions you can kind of tell, like, oh, people think of this person or these kinds of people as in group, and people think of these other kinds of people as out group. And that gives all sorts of credence to things we know about, tribalism and things like that. But then when they change the parameters to, say, people wearing paraphernalia of sports teams, all of a sudden those previous groupings go away, because now the new criteria is whether people are fans of a sports team or not. And so the concept of groups, the concept of categories that we put people into, is extremely malleable depending on what the criteria we set forth are. So again, that comes in on the back end of the individuals and the individual differences. There's this thing called convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is where essentially similar, or for our purposes the same trait, evolves within two separate species who do not have a known common ancestor, and thus meaning that similar environmental pressures force them to create similar adaptations. Great example, cat eyes and snake eyes. Cats and snakes don't have any kind of known common ancestor, but yet they both seem to have faced environmental pressures or selection pressures that contribute to them both having very similar eye structure. What does it mean? Well, it doesn't really mean anything. It just means that those adaptations happened because they were facing similar pressures where that was a reasonable solution for the species to continue surviving. And so when we look at this stuff, again, it really comes down to, like, outside of the species that you are part of, because there is a genetic distinction there. I mean, most humans are something like 99.9% the same, and it's like a 0.1% difference that that demonstrates all of the differences between us. But our next closest relatives, which I cannot remember offhand which they are, but genetically speaking, like, the next closest thing to us is still several partial percents away from that. Like, there's a gap there, so we can kind of confidently say distinctly human, and then it gets real fuzzy from there. Because while you might say something like, well, that's pretty distinct, men versus women, yeah, but then I've heard, like, medical people argue that other than the plumbing, there's a lot of things that the differences in plumbing don't account for physiologically, as for, like, training and thought processes and stuff. There's still a lot of individuality there. So while I definitely believe that male and female sex are two distinct things, allowing, of course, for the intersex individuals that end up popping up due to, for lack of a better term, errant coding in the gestation process. Generally speaking, yeah, okay, maybe males and females are kind of distinct groups, but only insofar as what determines the actual sex organs. But beyond that, as far as, like, what's going to determine athletic performance, intelligence, psychology, all that stuff, that is also very individual, that short of identifying sex organs, it's not all that useful of a distinction. And we see that with ethnic groups as well, and we see that with handicaps and things like that. I know handicap is not a popular term these days, but people who are handicapped are not automatically deficient in all things. They may have that one handicap, but then may very well excel in other things, which then basically means that them being handicapped is not actually something that you can chunk them together as, unless you were specifically talking about that one criteria. So again, this concept of being part of a group and identifying with certain isms is all back-end stuff. It's all stuff that is relatively artificial, and it's all stuff that absolutely must be clarified and defined beforehand, because human, individual, then distant third, part of a group. So, whether you believe in, I sometimes, kind of tried that I'm a nihilist, but I'm not a nihilist in a sense of I have adopted the philosophy of nihilism. It is more the fact that I agree with some of the tenets that are put forth by nihilism, but I am not part of that ism. I do not identify with that ism, and I don't think it is healthy to wrap your identity up into these external things. I think that because those things are so malleable, as soon as those things change, people end up feeling lost or rejected or set aside, and that creates a whole host of psychological issues, and many of those can be overcome quite simply, and others tend to stick around for a while. And so this kind of hard line identifying with groups, with isms, becomes a very, very difficult thing to maintain because of the fluctuating nature of them. So it is far, far better to approach life as an individual, and to approach affiliations as an individual, and to approach affiliations freely, and allow those who affiliate with you to also move freely between affiliations. Because the fact is that without free association, we literally box ourselves in, psychologically speaking, culturally speaking, for no good purpose. We create these artificial rules and loyalties and all these things that don't really serve us when we do things that way. So, if you approach life as an individual and not part of a group, you can then associate with people based on certain groupings, certain criteria that serve purpose at the time, and freely move to others that serve a different purpose at a different time when different criteria need to be met. It is far, far more psychologically healthy to do that, and I think you just end up living a better life when you live life as an individual, and not as some sort of adjunct to an external identity. So I think I've rambled on long enough, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey.